Hello, good day to everyone. My name is Daniela Benitez Zamora, and today I am going to be talking about the Gestalt. In this presentation, I will be talking about the definition of the psychology, the three founders, the seven principles, the main principles in learning, and how it can be applied to teach English. First, we have to know what Gestalt is. Gestalt, by definition, is a physical, biological, or symbolic configuration or pattern of elements so unified as a whole that its properties cannot be identified from a simple summation of its parts. Now, Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that looks at the human mind and behavior as a whole. When trying to make sense of the world around us, Gestalt psychology suggests that we do not simply focus on every small component. Instead, our minds tend to perceive objects as a part of a greater whole and as elements of more complex systems. This school of psychology played a major role in the modern development of the study of human sensation and perception. The fundamental formula of Gestalt theory might be expressed in this way. Max Wertheimer, who is one of the authors we will be talking about, wrote, "There are wholes, the behavior of which is not determined by that of their individual elements, but where the part processes are themselves determined by the intrinsic nature of the whole. It is the hope of Gestalt theory to determine the nature of such wholes." With these thoughts, we can talk about Wertheimer, Kafka, and Kuller, who formed the Gestalt school. First, we have Max Wertheimer, who was born April 15, 1880, in Prague. He was the son of a familiar banker who devoted himself to teaching. He carried out research in various areas at Prague, Berlin, and Vienna, becoming particularly interested in the perception of complex and ambiguous structures. He discovered that feeble-minded children can solve problems when they can grasp the overall structures involved. And he began to formulate the ideas that would later take root in Gestalt psychology. He worked at the Psychological Institute of Frankfurt University. During this time, he observed how two stationary objects created an illusion of movement. He named this the phi phenomenon, and it formed the basis of Gestalt psychology, which revolutionized psychological thinking. His interest in perception increased, and he continued his research in perception. Second, we have Kurt Kafka, who was born May 18, 1886, in Berlin, Germany. Kafka was associated with the University of Gießen and served as an object in 1912 along with Kuller in experiments of perception conducted by Wertheimer. Their findings led Kafka, Wertheimer, and Kuller to stress the holistic approach that psychological phenomena cannot be interpreted as combination of elements. Parts derive their meaning from the whole, and people perceive complex entities rather than their elements. Kafka conducted much experimental work, but he is perhaps best known for his systematic application of Gestalt principles to a wide range of questions. One of his major works, The Growth of the Mind, published in 1921, applied the Gestalt viewpoint to child psychology and argued that infants initially experience organized wholes in their barely differentiated world about them. And finally, we have Wolfgang Kuller, who was born January 21, 1887, in Reval, Estonia in the Russian Empire, now Tallinn, Estonia. In 1912, as it was mentioned before, he and Kurt Kafka were subjects for the experiments on perception conducted by Max Wertheimer, whose report on the experiments launched the Gestalt movement. Thereafter, Euler was associated with Wertheimer and Kafka as the three endeavored to gain acceptance for the new theory. As director of the Anthropoid Research Station of the Prussian Academy of Science at Tenerife in Canary Islands from 1913 until 1920, Euler conducted experiments of solving by chimpanzees, revealing their ability to devise and use simple tools and build simple structures. His findings appear in the book The Mentality of Apes, published in 1917, a work that emphasized insight and led to a radical revision of learning theory. Another major work, Physical Gestalt in Rest and Stationary States, published in 1920, was based on an attempt to determine the relation of physical process in nervous tissue to perception. Now, reviewing a little bit of what we said in the beginning, we have that according to the Gestalt theory, which is commonly known as the law of simplicity, every stimulus is perceived by human in its most simple form. The main focus of the theory is grouping, and the entire theory emphasizes on the fact that the whole of anything is greater than the sum of its parts. Besides, Gestalt in German means the shape of an entity's complete form. Thus, the operational principle of the brain is holistic and has a self-organization inclination. The Gestalt theory has 7 principles or laws. The fundamental law that governs a Gestalt principle is that we tend to order our experience in a manner that's regular, orderly, and recognizable. This is what allows us to create meaning in a complex and chaotic world. The factors that determine the principle of grouping, also known as the laws of organization, are the following. 1. Law of similarity. The law of similarity suggests that similar things tend to appear grouped together. Grouping can occur in both visual and auditory stimuli. 2. Law of prognance. The word prognance is a German term meaning good figure. The law of prognance is sometimes referred to as the law of good figure or the law of simplicity. This law holds that objects in the environment are seen in a way that makes them appear as simple as possible. 3. Law of proximity. According to the law of proximity, things that are near each other seem to be grouped together. 4. Law of continuity. The law of continuity holds that points that are connected by straight or curving lines are seen in a way that follows the smoothest path. Rather than seeing separate lines and angles, lines are seen as belonging together. 5. Law of closure. According to the law of closure, things are grouped together if they seem to complete some entity. Our brains often ignore contradictory information and fill in gaps in information. 6. The law of common region. This Gestalt law of perceptual organization suggests that elements that are grouped together within the same region of space tend to be grouped together. The Gestalt laws of perceptual organization present a set of principles for understanding some of the ways in which perception works. Research continues to offer insights into perception and how we see the world. These principles of organization play a role in perception, but it is also important to remember that these principles can sometimes lead to incorrect perception of the world. The primary goal of Gestalt theory is to encourage the brain to view not just the whole, but also the parts that make up the whole. For example, when someone is looking at a tree, is he just staring at this tree, or does he also see the leaf, the branches, and the trunk? The whole and the sum of its parts are two entirely different things, and learning can be achieved if learners are able to cognitively process how parts make up this whole. The main principles of Gestalt theory in learning are three. 1. Teachers should encourage their students to discover the relationship of the elements that make up a problem. 2. Incongruities, gaps, or disturbances are essential stimuli in the learning process. 3. Educational instruction should be based on the laws of organization. In a learning environment, the Gestalt theory applies to our problem solving and perception. However, it can be used in all aspects of education. Gestalt psychology's contribution to education lies in its concept of the organization of stimuli and insight. The world, the classroom in which the child is living and learning, is not just a body of discrete stimuli, nor is his responses to it those trial and error adaptations. The world is organized, it has meaning. The child can reach with understanding he has inside. Arithmetic is not an isolated pack, but a system of numbers. History is not names and dates, but the sweep of events through time. With one thing leading to or following another, the child can respond to 3 to 4 because he can add 3 and 4. A perfect example was provided by Wertheimer himself when he asked children to find the area of a parallelogram. He suggested that, as long as parallelograms had a normal shape, the children could apply the standard procedure in order to determine the area. However, if the parallelogram had an irregular shape, children could not apply the same logical principles but had to solve the problem by understanding the actual structure of the shape. Gestalt is also used to teach English. There is a close relationship between English listening comprehension text and cognitive linguistic theory, such as Gestalt theory and relevant principles are also fully applied in English listening tests in universities and colleges. Besides, the connotation of integrity of Gestalt theory has been also applied in the process of English. As a psychological theory, Gestalt theory has a close relationship with many linguistic fields, especially cognitive linguistics. Many teachers just regard their English vocabulary as the key point in English learning and teaching under the influence of traditional English teaching methods and the existing examination system for many years. A large amount of English vocabulary explanations will make students become bored, and there will also be not a good effect in English learning and teaching. In the field of cognitive linguistics, Gestalt theory is described as categorized basis, and there are mainly two steps when a person is judging something. The first step is Gestalt perception. Then, they can decompose objects into attributes. It can be clearly seen that Gestalt perception plays an important role in the categorization, and some Gestalt principles put forward by Pragnas have a deep and comprehensive understanding of the process of recognition of language. Besides, Gestalt theory and principles also have reasonable explanations of how vision and hearing organize in people's brains in order to make people procedure corresponding language. Proximity principle means that two or more individuals of short distance can be perceived as a Gestalt, and this kind of proximity is reflected in proximity in actual distance in the process of language understanding, but also it is reflected in the proximity of psychological distance. People generally summarize two or more individuals which can be easily to be associated together as a Gestalt. This is very commonly seen in English listening comprehension texts, so that students hear clearly the key words They can naturally think or predict the meaning of who is dialoguing in order to pick up a right answer. Similarity principle means that people will perceive two or more individuals of similar characteristics and attributes as one gestalt, and students should form a complete image in their minds by using their overall perception ability. Then, they can distinguish the attributes of the individuals in order to analyze the intention of the text. This principle is generally reflected in English listening tests, namely, several individuals of same characteristics are put together so that students could find their similarities by this principle. Close principle refers to a close outline composed by the individuals, and this principle is more applied in the perception of graphs, which means that people will naturally regard a closed graph on the object inside that the graph as a whole part. This principle is also embodied in language expression, and they are called semantic closure as well as closure of the logical relationship between sentences. Continuity principle means several continuous individuals which cannot be interrupted generally can be perceived as on Gestalt. The application of this principle is more direct in the perception of graphs. For example, people will generally consider continuous river and gallery as a whole. However, this principle in English listening is reflected as a continuity and a sequence of an event. These four principles are the most used in English tests. As a psychological theory, Gestalt theory can be applied in language understanding and language expressions to a large extent. Although it can help improve students' English listening comprehension ability with the four Gestalt principles, it cannot deal with all kinds of situations, and many principles may be involved in one topic of English listening, so that English teachers should cultivate a kind of entire perceptual ability of students in English learning. For the conclusion, I think applying this psychology to teach English is really helpful because Gestalt psychologists suggest educators to conceive the problem of learning in more comprehensive terms. The teacher should organize the learning situation so that significant relations emerge and understanding of the material results. The learning experiences should be arranged that the learner discovers and generalizes the relationship for himself. The subject matter should be organized into larger units or meaningful wholes. This could help a lot to understand topic of grammar or vocabulary because it focuses on being in an organized lesson. So presenting this to the student could make easier for them to understand new vocabulary or new grammar rules that in another way could be really difficult for them to understand or even bored if they are being taught the same way all the time. This has been all for this presentation. I hope all of this information can be helpful, and thank you so much for listening to this presentation.